Barry White's smooth baritone dominated the charts, his love songs melting hearts worldwide. But there was more to the Walrus of Love than his velvety voice. Before becoming a musical sensation, Barry ran with the notorious LA gang. His journey from the streets to stardom was a surprising tale of transformation that would shock even his most devoted fans. Development. Barry White's journey from troubled youth to music legend is a story of grit and redemption. Born in Galveston, Texas, Barry's early years were shaped by the gritty realities of life in Los Angeles, where he grew up. Young Barry was surrounded by poverty and violence, trying to find his place in the world. Watts, South LA, California, early 1960s. Watts was full of racial tensions, crime, and social unrest. For kids like Barry, the streets were wild and unpredictable. Surviving was the main goal, and gang life offered protection and a sense of belonging. At age 16, Barry made a choice that would change his life. He got busted stealing $30,000 worth of Cadillac tires. To put that in perspective, $30K in 1960 is equivalent to a purchasing power of $320,000 today. This was a serious crime that could have sent him on a bad path, but sometimes big mistakes lead to big changes. As Barry got older, he got deeper into trouble, joining a gang called the Businessmen. Don't be fooled by the name. These were not guys in suits and Homburg hats. The Businessmen were one of the toughest gangs in South LA. They aspired to be fully organized, hence the name. Watts in the 60s was like a war zone. Rival gangs fought for control. Groups like the Gladiators, Slossons, Swamp Boys, and Watts sold drugs, fought, and turf wars were all a part of daily life. These guys were not that sophisticated. Back then, it was all about who was the toughest with their fists. They sold marijuana, but large-scale distribution of heroin and grand larceny wasn't in the cards. But a young Barry White was stepping up. Barry has said his life back then was always on the edge between staying alive and ruining himself. He admitted to stealing dozens of cars as a teenager. It wasn't for joyrides, it was how he survived in a world with few other options. The Watts riots in 1965 changed things for many people, including Barry. He saw the chaos firsthand. After '65, gangs stopped feuding with each other because a common enemy had surfaced: law enforcement. Everything came to a head when Barry got sent to juvenile detention for 4 months for stealing those expensive tires. For a 16-year-old, it felt like forever. This is where fate might have intervened on Barry's behalf. Picture this: Barry White is locked up and cut off from the outside world. But the times, they are a-changin'. The Black Power movement and community empowerment organizations like the Black Panthers were gaining momentum. This new era set the stage for one of the most amazing transformations in music history. Jailhouse rock, the Elvis moment. Locked up at 16, Barry White thought he'd heard it all. Then one day, a familiar voice drifted through the cell block, carrying a message that would change everything. He's probably thinking about his next move, maybe planning his next big score once he gets out. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was just another day in juvie when an officer flipped on the radio. The sound of Elvis Presley's "It's Now or Never" filled the air. Now, this song had been out for a while. It hit the airwaves back in 1960 and topped the charts. But for Barry, it was like hearing it for the first time. Something clicked in that instance. The lyrics about seizing the moment and not letting love slip away can hit hard when you're staring at 4 concrete walls. Barry later said it felt like Elvis was talking directly to him. It was about life, choices, and the path he was on. See, Barry had always been into music. His mom had given him piano lessons when he was younger. Here's an endearing story of when Barry's voice changed from that of a teenager to a grown man.
I woke up one morning when I was 14 and
You woke up?
I spoke to my mother, and I scared both of us.
Barry's mind was racing. He thought about his life up until that point. The gangs, the crime, the constant hustle. Was this really the future he wanted? The lyrics of Elvis's "It's Now or Never" kept echoing in his head. It really was now or never. Right there in that cell, Barry made a decision. Music was going to be his way out, his ticket to a different life. He promised himself he'd turn things around and pursue music when he got out. Don't forget, if he didn't go straight, he would have gotten swept up by the Black Power and Civil Rights movement. South LA, especially Watts, was about to change. And political dissent in the early 70s will see Raymond Washington founding the Crips. When Barry got out of juvie, he wasted no time. He jumped into the music world, doing whatever he could to get his foot in the door. Writing, producing, arranging, he did it all. It wasn't easy, and success didn't come overnight, but the 4 months in a cell kept his eye on the prize. Years later, when Barry was topping the charts with his own love songs, he never forgot that moment. He knew music could touch people and change lives. That's why his songs were about more than just romance. They were about hope, second chances, and love's power to transform. So Elvis Presley's song set a young gangster on the path to becoming the Walrus of Love. It just goes to show, inspiration can strike anywhere, even in an 8x6 cell. The hustle, early music career. Music changed Barry White's life, but it would take years of hustle before the world heard his voice. What does it take to go from dreamer to soul music legend? Barry's journey was about to test his new determination. Fresh out of juvenile detention, Barry hit the streets of LA with a new goal. He wanted to make it big in music, but dreams of stardom aren't easy to catch, especially for a kid with a criminal record. Barry started knocking on doors of small independent labels. These weren't fancy offices. We're talking about tiny rooms in old buildings, where dreams often fizzled out. But Barry wasn't going to let his dream die. He used to stand across the street from the Capitol Records building in Hollywood, pacing back and forth, just watching people go in and out of the building. He knew that one day he would be in the music industry, and he was visualizing himself walking into such a building for business meetings. He took any music job that he could get. Writing, arranging, producing, Barry did it all. He learned the business from the ground up, and people started noticing his talent. He had a great ear for arranging, a gift for production, and damn, could he write a love song. But in the tough music world of the 1960s, talent wasn't enough. You needed connections, luck, and good timing. For a while, it seemed like Barry's timing was always off. The next few years were up and down. Barry kept working hard, believing his time would come. He moved from label to label, always giving his best, but never quite making it big. The music industry taught him some hard lessons, and Barry learned them all. But going back to good timing, well, Barry's moment was on its way. It started when he founded a girl group with something special. Barry saw in them what others had seen in him, raw talent ready to shine. He named them Love Unlimited, not knowing they'd change his life. Working with Love Unlimited, Barry finally hit his stride. He made music that felt true to himself. People started to notice, but his big break was still coming. So what was Barry White's first hit that launched his career? That's a story for later, but let's just say it involved Barry stepping into the spotlight in a way that would change soul music for good. The Voice. Barry steps into the spotlight. They say opportunity knocks when you least expect it. For Barry White, it didn't just knock, it kicked down the door. But here's the twist. The man who'd spent years chasing his big break was now running from it. What made Barry hesitate when his moment finally arrived? Well, Barry had been grinding away in the music industry for years, always behind the scenes. He was the guy making other artists sound good, the puppet master pulling the strings. But in 1973, everything changed. It started simple enough. Barry was working on demos for a male artist, just another day in the studio. He laid down some tracks, singing the songs himself. This was normal. Producers often recorded guide vocals to show the artist how the song should sound. But this time was different. Barry's friend Larry Nunez heard these demos, and wow, did they blow him away. Nunez was sure these weren't just demos. They were the real deal. And Barry should be the one to release them. You'd think Barry would be excited. After all, isn't this what he'd been working towards? But Barry wasn't so sure. He'd gotten comfortable in the background. The spotlight was a whole new game. Nunez saw something in Barry that Barry couldn't see in himself. It was not just the voice, though that deep baritone was part of it. It was everything. The songwriting, the arranging, the production skills. Nunez knew Barry had what it took to be more than just a behind-the-scenes guy. After days of talking it over, Barry finally agreed to record an album. As Barry White, not as a producer or songwriter for someone else, but as the main act. It was a big step, and Barry was nervous. But sometimes you've got to take that chance. In 1973, Barry released his first solo album, I've Got So Much to Give. The title fit. He had been holding back all this talent for years, and now he was sharing it with the world. The album showed off his amazing voice and his ability to put real feeling into music. People loved it. They couldn't get enough of Barry's smooth voice and heartfelt lyrics. It was the start of a solo career that would last decades and inspire generations of artists. Barry White, the reluctant star, had found his place in the spotlight. But that first album was just the beginning. Over his career, Barry White would earn 106 gold albums. Yeah, you heard that right, 106. It shows just how much people loved his music and how it stood the test of time. From that first nervous step into the limelight, Barry White became a big deal in the music world. It almost didn't happen. If it weren't for a pushy friend and a leap of faith, we might never have known the Barry White we all came to love. The Walrus of Love. Barry White's voice was something else. When he stepped up to the mic, he didn't just sing, he seduced. In the early 70s, Barry was cooking up a special sound in the studio, mixing soul, funk, and disco. His music had this movie-like quality, with big orchestras that made you feel like you were part of something grand. At first, some critics didn't know what to make of Barry's sound. They thought it was too sexy, too smooth. But fans, they loved it. His albums were selling like hotcakes. His love songs weren't your usual lovey-dovey stuff. Barry had a way with words that really hit home. And the way he sang them, wow. He'd take it slow, build up the tension until you were hanging on every word. People in the music biz gave Barry all sorts of nicknames. The Maestro, the Ambassador of Love. But the one that stuck was the Walrus of Love. You'd think a guy wouldn't want to be called a walrus, like it's some kind of roast, but Barry owned it. He knew exactly who he was. His albums were huge hits. You'd know it was him the second you heard it on the radio. As the 70s went on, Barry's influence kept growing. His music became the go-to for anyone wanting to set the mood. He wasn't just making songs, he was creating experiences. Each track was like a journey through love and passion. So next time you hear that smooth voice singing about love, remember, you're listening to a piece of music history. Barry White changed how we express love through music. And that's something that'll keep on grooving for years to come. The dark side of success, Barry's personal struggles. Success did come at a price. As his albums went platinum, his personal life was crumbling. The man who sang about eternal love was about to face a tragedy that would shake him to the core and force him to confront the life he thought he'd left behind. Barry was on top of the world in the mid-70s. His velvety voice was dominating the airwaves, and he was selling millions of records. Fans couldn't get enough of his love songs. But behind the scenes, Barry was dealing with a whole different kind of pressure. The constant touring was taking its toll. Barry was on the road for months at a time, moving from city to city, stage to stage. It was exhausting, both physically and mentally. The public scrutiny that came with fame wasn't helping either. Every move he made, every pound he gained or lost, was gossip for magazines. But Barry's weight was becoming a serious health issue. He had high blood pressure, and his doctors were worried. The demands of his career made it hard to focus on his health. He smoked up to 8 packs of cigarettes a day, which was catching up with him. I mean, let's face it, if you're smoking 8 packs a day, that is chain smoking from morning till night. He was in and out of hospitals more often. Then came the blow that would shake Barry to his core. In 1983, his younger brother Daryl was shot to death in a dispute with a neighbor over money. It was a harsh reminder of the life Barry had left behind, the life that could have been his if he hadn't found music. Daryl's death brought back memories of their tough childhood in Watts, of the gang life they'd both been part of. Barry had made it out, but Daryl hadn't been so lucky. The two brothers were close, and the depression was overwhelming. This tragedy forced Barry to take a hard look at his life choices. He'd always known how close he'd come to a very different fate, but Daryl's death made it painfully real. It strengthened Barry's resolve to use his music to spread a message of love and unity, to be a positive force in the world. But the challenges kept coming. The music industry was changing fast. Disco, which had helped make Barry a superstar, was dying out. Some people wondered if his career would die with it. He was facing pressure to change his sound, to adapt to new trends. Through it all, Barry kept making music. He was determined to stay true to his message of love, even as the industry around him shifted. He threw himself into his work, using music to reaffirm his purpose. Barry White wasn't one to give up easily. The same determination that had gotten him out of Watts and into the music industry kept him going through these tough times. He kept touring, kept recording, kept spreading his message of love. In the end, Barry White's personal struggles only deepened the emotion in his music. The man who sang about love knew all too well about loss, pain, and overcoming adversity. And that's what made his music resonate with so many people. When Barry White sang about love conquering all, you knew he'd lived it. The comeback king, Barry in the 90s. Just when everyone thought the Walrus of Love was done, the 90s brought a wave of change. Could Barry White really make it in a world of grunge and hip-hop? The 80s had been tough on him. His smooth soul sound didn't fit with synth-pop and hair metal. But Barry wasn't giving up. He knew his time would come again, and it did. In 1994, he released The Icon Is Love. This record was different. Barry was reinventing himself for a new generation. It was a huge hit, topping the Billboard R&B album charts and selling over 3 million copies. People loved that smooth Barry White sound all over again. The single, Practice What You Preach, became Barry's first #1 R&B hit in almost 20 years. Barry had actually started his comeback a few years earlier with Put Me In Your Mix in 1991, building up to this big moment. He didn't just stick to his old style. He worked with new artists, keeping his music fresh. One of his biggest hits was a duet with Tina Turner, called In Your Wildest Dreams. Two music legends together. How cool is that? Barry was everywhere, not just in music. He showed up on TV shows like The Simpsons and Ally McBeal. His songs were all over the place, reminding folks why they loved Barry White in the first place. A whole new group of fans discovered Barry's music. Kids who weren't even born when Barry first got big were now enjoying his smooth sounds. It was like he found a way to stay popular forever. All his hard work paid off big time in 1999. Barry's album, Staying Power, won 2 Grammy Awards. After years in the music business, he finally had those golden trophies to show for it. Barry White's comeback in the 90s showed that great music never gets old. His smooth soul found new fans, connecting different generations. The Maestro of Love proved that with talent, hard work, and a lot of soul, you can always make it back to the top. The final notes. Barry's last years. Barry White had climbed back to the top, but fate had other plans. The Walrus of Love was about to face his toughest challenge yet, one that even his legendary voice couldn't overcome. What happened to the man who taught the world about love? By the early 2000s, Barry White was on top again. He had won 2 Grammys, released hit albums, and reminded everyone why they loved his music. But behind that smooth exterior, Barry was fighting a silent battle. In September 2002, he got some bad news. Doctors told him he had kidney failure. This was serious. His kidneys were shutting down, and he needed dialysis to stay alive. They wanted to get him a kidney transplant, but that's not easy. Barry kept performing as long as he could, even as his health got worse. His last big show was in Sydney, Australia, on November 24, 2000. It was tough. Barry couldn't move without assistance, and some people in the crowd couldn't see him properly. There were even some boos. Barry's son later said, "He was trying. He was struggling, but he was trying, and God bless him for that." As time went on, Barry's health kept deteriorating. He ended up in a wheelchair. In 2002, he had to retire from performing. For a guy who lived for music and connecting with his audience, this was really hard. Even though he couldn't perform, Barry kept spreading his message of love however he could. That was his thing. Love wasn't just something he sang about, it was how he lived. In May 2003, Barry had a stroke. He was in and out of the hospital, getting dialysis. Then, on July 4th, 2003, Barry White passed away. He was 58 years old. The doctor said it was complications from kidney failure, high blood pressure, and diabetes. After Barry passed away, fans came together to celebrate his life. Hundreds of people danced to his songs in a park in Los Angeles. It was a perfect way to remember a man who spent his life making music that moved people. He once said, "There's people making babies to my music. That's nice." So Barry White was 58 when he died on July 4th, 2003. Barry's story is nothing short of amazing. He started out as a troubled kid in Watts, but ended up becoming one of the greatest soul artists ever. He found a way to talk about love that connected with millions of people. His deep voice and smooth tunes continue to influence artists today. His sound has become essential for all kinds of artists, from R&B singers to hip-hop producers. A short list includes Gerald Levert, Lisa Stansfield, Simply Red, and Big Daddy Kane, who had Barry guest on his 1990 song, All of Me, from the album Taste of Chocolate. Barry's music spread a message of love and unity that still hits home. In a world that often seems divided, Barry's songs remind us what's truly important. He once said, "Love is the most important thing in the world. It's the only thing that can save us." The Walrus of Love gave us more than just hit songs. He showed how music could bring people together. His legacy keeps touching hearts and uniting listeners, proving that great artists can shape culture long after they're gone. Rest in peace to an LA legend. Peace.